Hello, fourth graders. Welcome to lesson 6.7, Compare Fractions. Let's get started with a word problem. Remember, you don't have to recopy this word problem, but you do want to take important notes from the word problem itself. Every year, Avery's school has a fair. This year, 3/8 of the booths had face painting, and 1/4 of the booths had sand art. Were there more booths with face painting or sand art? Okay, every year Avery's school has a fair. This year, 3/8 of the booths had face painting, and 1/4 of the booths had sand art. Were there more booths with face painting or sand art? Wow, let's see. Let's take some notes. We have 3/8 face painting. I'm going to put FP for face painting. And then 1/4 of the booths, 1/4, that's another way of saying 1/4, is sand art, SA. Those are my notes. You should take them too. And basically what they're asking us to do, were there more, which one is more, a greater fraction? More of the booths. So what we're doing is comparing 3/8 to 1/4. And the first way we're going to compare is by using a common denominator. Write this down. Compare by using a common denominator. Now, you should remember common denominator is finding a common multiple between the two denominators. So we have eighths. Let me do some circling here. We have eighths and we have fourths. I'm hoping right away what jumps out to you is the fact that eighths is a common multiple of 4 and 8. 2 times 4 is 8, 8 times 1 is 8. So we can keep the eighths the same, 3/8. What we'd like to do is change 1/4 to eighths by finding an equivalent fraction. So 1/4 equals how many eighths? You should recognize that 4 times 2 is 8. Therefore, if the denominator's been multiplied by 2, the numerator needs to be multiplied by 2 to make an equivalent fraction. So now we have 2/8. 1/4 is equal to 2/8. So if we are comparing 3/8 to 2/8, it's pretty obvious that 3 out of 8 is greater than 2 out of 8. Therefore, 3/8 is greater than 1/4. We didn't even have to change the eighths because 8 and 4 are common denominators / common multiples. Remember not to get your multiples and factors mixed up. Many students do this. All right, let's move on to another problem. Or actually, another way of solving the same problem. Now this one is in our lesson from Go Math. I don't necessarily use this method too often. This is using a common numerator. but it can be done, and it does make sense. I think I'm just so used to finding common denominators that this particular way is different for me. Okay, so we're going to take a look at 3/8 and 1/4. And if we just take a look at the numerator, the numerators, we have 3 and 1. We can change those both to 3. So again, we don't have to touch 3/8. 3 out of 8. And again, when you're finding common numerators, you're still finding common multiples. So 3/8 can stay the same. We want to change 1/4 to 3 something. So it works the same way in that if our numerator changed to 3, we must have multiplied the numerator, the original numerator, by 3. 1 times 3 is 3. Therefore, the denominator needs to be multiplied by 3. So 4 times 3 is 12. So now we're looking at 3/12. Well, if you remember from last year, we looked closely at common numerators, like numerators. This was hard for some of you. So this might not be the best way to go when comparing fractions, but you should know it. 3 out of 8 and 3 out of 12. What you're thinking is, which one has smaller parts? And if you think about 12, these are smaller parts. And if you think about eighths, these are larger parts when compared to twelfths. So 3/8, 3 out of 8 would be bigger parts than 3 out of 12. Therefore, 3/8 is greater than 3/12. Okay, so that's using a common numerator. Previously, we used a common denominator. That is the way that I am so used to doing. But this one makes sense too, and you may use this as well. But the key here is that you need to remember when you're looking at those denominators, the greater the denominator, the smaller the parts. So if you have the same number of parts, you have smaller ones with the one with the greater denominator. Okay, let's look at another problem. 3/4 and 1/3. We will approach this in two different ways. First, through common denominators, my favorite way. Okay, some of you might already be looking at this and using your knowledge of benchmarks. Which one's greater than half? Well, of course, 3/4 is greater than half, and 1/3 is less than half. So if you were using your benchmarks, you'd already know that 3/4 is greater than 1/3. But we must get in the habit of making common denominators because you'll be doing that to add and subtract with fractions that have unlike denominators, and it is very important to know this skill. So here we can't keep one of the denominators because neither one of them are common multiples of each other. So if I think about multiples of 4, I have 4, 8, 12. And I think to myself right away, 3 shares that multiple. So bingo, I found my multiple. 3, 6, 9, 12. That's the least common multiple, the least common denominator. So I'm going to change 3/4 to 12ths, and I'm going to change 1/3 to 12ths. Let's see how we do this. Times 4 times 4 times 3 times 3. 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 4 is 12. 1 times 4 is 4. So now we know that 3/4 is equivalent to 9/12, and 1/3 is equivalent to 4/12. Well, I hope you all know that 9/12 is greater than 4/12. Therefore, 3/4 is greater than 1/3. Make sure you're taking all of these notes. All right, so that's using a common denominator. Let's try a common numerator. Even though we know this, it's the skill we're practicing. 3/4 and 1/3. Oops. Okay, so this is actually easier because we can keep 3/4 the same. And we can change 1/3 to 3 something, right? So we think, how does 1 change to 3 through multiplication? Well, times 3, of course. Therefore, I need to multiply the denominator by the same amount. 3 times 3 is 9ths. Okay, so now we're looking at 3/4 and 3/9. Well, again, 9ths will be smaller parts. 3 smaller parts in 3/9, or 3 larger parts in 3/4. 3 larger parts in 3/4 is going to be the greater fraction. So sometimes using a common numerator is less work than using a common denominator. But remember, that's if you truly understand what the denominator is telling you. That's how many parts are in the whole, the same size whole. Okay, that's enough note-taking. Now you are going to solve some problems on your own. Okay, here's 4 problems. Now, I don't want you to use benchmarks and mental math, even though you might know it. I appreciate that, and I applaud you for knowing that. However, you need to get in the habit of creating equivalent fractions. Therefore, you may either find common numerators or common denominators for all of these problems. Some of them you can simplify to make a common denominator. For example, 8/10 and 3/5. You might want to try changing 8/10 to fifths by simplifying that fraction. That would be a good way to go. You also need to get in the habit of simplifying fractions, so that's an important skill as well. Here you go. Good luck with this, and I will see you tomorrow.